Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome back to today's program Chris Jones, who's Executive Vice President, Industry and Services at Descartes. And today we're going to talk about what dominates the transportation management agenda in 2023. So if you're a transportation executive, you're always tasked with coming up with strategy and execution plan. The difference now is that maybe your CEO and CFO is more interested in what you're doing than in the past. And since the transportation market is cyclical, every year is different, and 2023 is no exception. So what dominates the transportation management agenda today? Well, that's the high-level question addressed in Descartes' 7th annual Global Transportation Management Benchmark Survey. And it's great to have Chris on the program to share his insights and advice, based on the research results. So Chris, welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks, Adrian.
So Chris, I was able to get a copy of the report earlier this week. You just released it just a few days ago. Lots of great content. So congrats on getting another great research report here. I haven't been able to fully digest everything, and we're not going to be able to fully, discuss everything in the report today, but hopefully we'll hit some highlights. And, I think one of the interesting things, when you do a survey like this for 7 years now, you get to see, some of the changes over time, and perhaps some of the things that don't change over time that,
Right.
Are also, interesting. So I think I'm looking forward to kind of getting your thoughts, with that kind of 7-year perspective, if you will, and in particular, what's top of mind and what's important, today and moving forward. So, to get started, the study, you look at how senior management, so I kind of joked, which is not really much of a joke, but, it's reality for many companies where the CEO, CFO now are really much more interested in what's happening in transportation. And you kind of look at that in the report a little bit, in terms of how senior management's perspective of transportation management influences the strategy, tactics, and technology decisions that they have. And you do the same with, financial performance. So what are some key takeaways on this front from the study?
Well, yeah. So when we started this thing, one of the things that just say from just experience and working with all kinds of companies was that I would just say the following: you could take the same application from the same vendor and give it to two companies, and one company gets phenomenal results, the other one doesn't. And that I'm not saying that they failed in their implementation; they may have got exactly what they expected, but that expectation was really low, right? So what we wanted to do here was look across the spectrum of I'll call it perception by management, and did it really make an impact? And then obviously, how well a company's doing is also another key factor there. It's not just how much money you spend, although we'll talk about that a little bit later, maybe that does play, but also it does change. I'll call it how aggressive companies are and so forth. And it's really a chicken or the egg conversation, right? It's the best way to describe it. So what we see is basically, if management believes that transportation is important, they really do push the envelope. And oh, by the way, they perform better financially as well. So if you think about this in terms of getting the value and so forth, they absolutely play here. So the other thing we also saw was that we asked things like growth and how strong was growth in companies, and it ties into the same thing. So I think one of the kind of the key messages that we got out of this study, and this is one of the ones to your point about being consistent, is that a lot of companies don't leverage or didn't leverage, maybe to your point, transportation management. During the pandemic, it turned everything upside down, and all of a sudden now there is a more focus on it. But the ones that really got it, it's like they untied an arm from behind their back, and they're actually doing things and getting a lot more value.
Yeah, no, I remember when, going on 24 years now as an industry analyst, back in the early days, I would say the vast majority of senior management viewed transportation as a cost center, and transportation was always at the bottom of the priority list when it came to IT investments, so on and so forth. I think in general, over the past 2+ decades, what we've seen is a growing number of companies that are finally recognizing that, hey, there's a strong link between transportation and our business strategy. There's a strong link between transportation could be and our logistics operations could be a competitive differentiator. Hey, and it's not just about cost and driving down cost. It could also
Right.
be about driving up sales or or profitability. And I think why I like some of these studies is I think those it kind of shows how companies that have that more broader perspective of transportation management and have evolved their perception of it or their understanding of it as just being a cost center to now being really a more critical aspect of their overall business strategy. I think shows the difference there. Um, talking about how the market is cyclical. I mean, I think if we were having this conversation, let's say in June of 2021, we would be, the market was in a very different situation then than it is, now. Then, shippers were struggling with getting capacity. Rates across virtually every mode was through the roof. Everybody's transportation budget was completely busted.
Right.
Today, we're in a softer rate environment. Capacity is not much of an issue. So, in light of kind of where we are today with rates and capacity, what are the top concerns for shippers and logistics service providers now?
Well, the funny thing about that is it may not have changed in terms of what's driving their agenda. When we looked at it, the number one issue is driver shortage. And we asked people to say over the next 5 years, like where they think things will go. So that one is out there. From our own research that we've done in that area, it's not going to get better. There's just too many challenges. A lot of them are demographic challenges, right? But guess what? Capacity and costs, fuel costs, were the number 2 and number 3. So capacity is still lingering. I think what it is, to your point, it's more available. But in terms of if you're asking, people like what problems do they want to solve, right? One of the things that we've seen in recent studies that we've done is all around, I'll call it resiliency. So the fact that capacity is available today doesn't mean it will be. And you said it, this business is cyclical, right? It may not be in the next coming years for a number of reasons. So in terms of what's in the back of shippers' minds or LSPs' minds is, I need to do a better job of making sure I'm going to have the capacity that I need. So while that dynamic has changed, the memories are pretty much burned in there tightly that, hey, this is something that maybe we didn't do a good job at, that we now have the opportunity to go address it while things are cooled down. But, history says it's going to come back and bite us if we're not careful.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think now is maybe they're to your point, maybe they're catching their breath now, and you could argue that now is the right time to really start
Yeah.
thinking more long term and start making these investments because they've got that latitude, they've got that breathing room. There's less risk involved today. There's more optionality that they have in terms of starting putting things in place for when the market will turn again, because we all know that it will. And because of some of these long-term trends that you're talking about, demographic, labor, and so forth, you can make the argument that the next time it comes around that the market shifts in the other direction, it'll be even more challenging than it was in the previous time. So now is the time to lay down that foundation. There's the classic saying, you can't manage what you don't measure. So obviously, metrics becomes a key part of this. So, when you made the comment earlier, you can give, technology to the same, two different companies, everything else, and their results could be different. And part of it could be because it's not just about technology. It's things like, the people that you have, the management support, and then obviously, the types of metrics you have in place. Do you have the right metrics? Are you taking action on them and so forth? So can you talk a little bit about what you learned from the study in terms of the importance of transportation management metrics that perhaps maybe go beyond the traditional ones you would expect? And how are this data, these metrics being used across the organization?
Right. So what we did was we looked at the classic, I'll call them traditional metrics that you typically see: cost and service. So that to me would also include things like on time and full, right? Okay, so those to me are the ones that I'll just say that's where most expectations were in the past, right? To your point, like what were people's perception of transportation years ago? You don't get any credit for it because it's an expectation. You get hit over the head if you don't get there, right? So that's, if you will, the traditional ones. The ones that are I'll call it more interesting and much more impactful are ones that where you look at like transportation's contribution to revenue or transportation's contribution to competitive differentiation. And if you're able to measure those, you actually start to show more where the value is. Now, what was really clear in the study was that top performers and the management teams that felt that transportation was more important, they were way ahead in those two metrics. They were actually out there saying, we need to know more about what we can do and how do we track that. And so I guess the lesson for everybody that's watching this is to look at like your metrics and what is it your metrics telling you about like what you're doing with transportation. And I just say for many companies, they're probably not giving themselves the real benefit of the doubt or highlighting the successes that they're having. And that definitely plays into, I'll call it how aggressive people get later with things like strategies and investment and so forth.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, the folks that are in the front lines of transportation, I think intuitively understand, how they contribute to the overall success in the company on multiple fronts. But going back to another quote, right? In God we trust, all others must bring data, right? That was the Deming quote. So again, it just speaks to the fact that companies to your point, ought to be thinking beyond these traditional metrics to really showcase, particularly to upper management, the role that transportation plays on these other parts of the business, particularly with revenue growth and customer satisfaction and profitability and so forth, because that's ultimately what's going to help drive continued investment in the operation, continued investment in people and processes and technologies and so forth to be able to achieve these these objectives moving forward. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about from a technology standpoint, perhaps, or just from an overall capability standpoint. I mean, what transportation management capabilities are expected to deliver the greatest value, let's say, over the next 2 years?
Yeah, so I would say there's really kind of a couple things here that really are top of mind. That the one that dominates is visibility. Okay, that one is still has been for a number of years now and stays very strong. So knowing where your goods are, by mode, even things that think of it as internationally, knowing, for instance, if you're clearing customs, all these kinds of things are really important because, again, this goes back to that point I mentioned about resiliency and so forth, which is you need to have a sense of where things are going and to be able to look at that and say, okay, am I going to be in trouble? And before you are in trouble, right? So being able to make smarter decisions around deploying inventory, even like think of it as a manufacturer. If you know ahead of time you're not going to get supplies in for, I'll call it your next production run, can you switch to something else so you don't miss a beat, right? All these kinds of things are things that we think are, really kind of what's driving that. The other things that were in that list were order management, which I think was interesting. It kind of popped up a little bit. Again, think of transportation as not just get it done, but really looking at what transportation, what's driving transportation, right? What kind of orders you're having, how are you really looking at being smarter around managing them? And then the last one is one I think that's been coming for a number of years and will continue to grow. And that's performance management and what I'd call business intelligence or dashboards, right? Transportation generates so much data. And this gets back to maybe one of the points here. You can learn in transportation about customer behavior, right? A lot about customer behavior, like are customers there to receive goods, how much demurrage is, or detention, excuse me, is occurring, right? A whole number of things like that, as well as just, what your carriers are doing or your fleet is doing and so forth. And so we see this as just a growing area, and it's really kind of a convergence with, I would describe it as the rise of very sophisticated but much easier to use, analytic dashboards and platforms.
Now this may be in the report, and maybe I just haven't gotten into it yet. Kind of building upon your comments about visibility and performance management. I mean, one of the areas that I think is going to continue to grow in importance is, and I've written about it in terms of expanding the definition of visibility to also include visibility to sustainability metrics or greenhouse gas emissions. And obviously transportation's, one of the key components, of that. Are you seeing that from, maybe that wasn't looked in the study, but from your customer base? I mean, when you're thinking about visibility, performance management, are you seeing a growing demand for having data visibility metrics around carbon emissions or sustainability related metrics?
Yes, the answer is yes. Actually, that was a little bit of this study, but another one we actually did in an area of like home delivery and sustainability. And we've done this now 2 years in a row. It's amazing how consumer behavior is changing. All right. And a couple things there that I think are very interesting, especially really around transportation. And so the first thing is, one, more and more consumers want to know what options are the most sustainable transportation options, right? And the next thing that falls right in line with that is they want to know, they are willing to take them. About 50% of them are willing to take them if they're identified as such. And that's where I think a lot of companies have really fallen down, is they're not necessarily telling people what's there. Now, what's the last thing of the punchline of all this is, sustainable delivery options are usually your lower cost delivery options. They're either around combining orders, slowing things down, taking suggestions from the company you're buying from that says, this is, hey, if we make this delivery at 2 o'clock tomorrow, that'll be the one that'll help the environment the most. And that is incredibly powerful. And so where I think the misperception has been is sustainability is going to cost people more, as a business, and it's not the case. It is actually the opposite. There's a huge opportunity to lower your transportation costs, and by the way, have happier customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think transportation is one of those areas where, again, going back to that old saying, being green is good for business. And it's certainly, very true in the transportation side, because of all the things you just said about all the things that you would do to be, green by default are going to lead to lower, transportation costs. Again, Chris, I mean, there's so much in this report. We're not going to get to it all. I'm going to include the link for folks to be able to download, the report at the end of, when we post the video. But maybe as a way to wrap up, I mean, what are some priorities for IT investment in transportation management, moving forward here?
Well, they actually line up very close to values. This doesn't always happen. Just in full disclosure, what people think is most important and where they're going to get value from and where they go spend their money sometimes doesn't really work. It's crazy. It shouldn't be that way. In this case, it does. So what we saw again was visibility at the top of the list, followed by again order management, and then this whole performance management and big data types of things are where people are going to invest for the next 2 years.
Yeah, no, I see the same thing from, the conversations I've had with shippers and LSPs as well. Third-party logistics companies are also, prioritizing, these areas as well. Well, Chris, as always, first, congrats on the report again. Great insights for the industry. And secondly, thanks for making the time to be with us and, share some highlights from the report.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Adrian, for having me on.
Great. I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Descartes website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Chris, you can post it there, and he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.